which actually disagrees with natural, observable phenomena. And there's nothing that actually has been shown to be that way. So, in summary, Brother said, yes, you're right, it was a simplification, but it was a deliberate and concerted simplification, but based, as I said, on some quite deep research about the subject. So that's what I'm for bringing up, and I really appreciate the chance to discuss things. Anything else? Yes, brother?
You know how, like, as a Muslim, you're supposed to be, like, strong and stuff? But you're supposed to be, like, peaceful and stuff too? What if, like, someone comes and, like, hits you? Do you like leaving alone, or do you like hitting back?
So the question is about, as Muslims, you know, we are meant to be obviously forbearing, but at the same time, you know, we shouldn't be pushovers. And likewise, in Islam, like any other civilized society, self-defense is obviously something which is very, you know, which is something which is enshrined in all sorts of laws. So I don't think there's any problem regarding that. But as Muslims, we should really, as I said, it comes to case. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to see if a person is really amenable to doubt at that time. But, you know, we just have to look at the conversion of Umar bin Khattab, Al-Ahmad, who came in a very violent rage to attack his sister and his brother-in-law. That it was only when they were able to give him some scripture to read that he was able to really turn his life around and become one of the greatest Muslims that ever lived. So it's really about having a balance. At the same time, as a Muslim community, we're not saying that we are pushovers or we are doormats, and we do not even treat other communities in that way either. We don't wish to subjugate and trample over other communities. We as a community need to earn respect, not necessarily demand it, and we will offer respect to those communities and other communities as they obviously need to earn it also. So I would say that it's about the balance. Obviously, in individual cases, if someone's going to strike you, of course you should defend yourself, and straight in the door will enshrine that as well as any other civilized society. But at the same time, we should realize that the way in which we act is also going to be scrutinized. I'll give you an example. There have been cases in the West where a Muslim has been burgled or robbed and has forgiven the person who burgled or robbed them. This is a game changer. You know, even though that person has the right to get that person punished, but that person has forgiven something. This is really important that we do that kind of thing. For the sake of Allah, there's a person who wants to be forgiven. The person forgives, so he will be forgiven on the Day of Judgment. And we have to act in that godly kind of manner. But at the same time, this is how we will change the perception of non-Muslims about Islam as well, as a side product. That we will show that how we as Muslims really need to personify and exemplify mercy and forgiveness above and first and foremost. So this is what I would say is what we should do. I hope that answers your question, brother. About giving the balance that, of course, you should defend yourself when you attack, but as a community, we should at the same time show magnanimity, show that we are above some of the base actions of society. And I think with that, we're going to end, inshallah. I'll end my talk there. Subhanahu wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. For attending, hope to see you on Saturday for the Dawah training course, and for the Ishraq will now round up these proceedings.
Salim and the brothers who brought you here, mashallah, come long way from England. As Brother mentioned, he's here for the next few days. So tomorrow night, inshallah, at the Al-Ahmad Masjid, he will be giving a talk on the purpose of life after Maghrib. Then on Friday night, it's at Building 26 in Manning Clark Centre, Kingsley Street in Echo. That's at 6:30, inshallah, and then Saturday I've got a mentioned Call of Duty Dawah training course, and that's from 9:30 to 4 p.m. At the Spence Masjid, inshallah. And we love to have brothers again, and we'll be praying inshallah, and then we'll have some informal chat.
Help you not answer certain questions, because it's not necessary for you to answer every single question and deal with things in every single detail. As we Muslims sometimes tend to do when we're doing dawah, we have to answer absolutely everything. I mean, the question I have is if somebody asks you, why are there 3 rak'ahs for Maghrib and 4 for Isha? How are you going to begin to answer that? Won't you be able to give a very credible answer to that? So in the same way, we have to realize that we should know what is it we're talking about. And that thirdly, we don't answer every single question. And fourthly, that we call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not we call to bits of cloth, the headscarves, or the beard. Because unfortunately, a lot of the time when we're giving da'wah, we are giving rational justifications for these things. Which is all well and good, but without the context that this is from divine command, then this becomes a bit of a useless and empty point. So inshallah, all these things will be covered in the course on Saturday, inshallah. Yes, brother, there's a question there. Yeah.
Bismillah. Well, you touched about the matter that once people discussed Prophet Muhammad, he replied very respectfully to them rather than in the same tone. But at that time, for example, Salman Rushdie or other people who do those sort of...
Sorry, but could you speak a bit louder, a bit more clearly?
For example, Salman Rushdie or other people who made those sort of activities against Prophet Muhammad. What's the opinion of Islamic scholars? How should we deal with Salman Rushdie? Should he be killed? Or should he be very respectful so that we understand the personality of Prophet Muhammad? So what do you think about that?
Okay, regarding people who insult the Prophet Islamically, we live in non-Muslim countries, then really what Muslims should be working towards is using these opportunities for da'wah. That's the first thing. Secondly, as a background, Muslims should be seeking and working towards getting Islam included under any blasphemy laws. But the reason why I say why should we do da'wah first is people mistakenly think that Muslims are not open to discussion and debate about their religion. Rather, on the contrary, Muslims, we should be welcoming people to ask questions about the fundamentals of Islam. You see, we have no problem with a person saying that with respect, I do not believe that your prophet is a prophet, and I believe he may have been an impostor. There's a big difference between saying that and then making a whole kind of story, where a person makes, calls the names of a bunch of prostitutes that are the same names as the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, and does a whole parody of Islam, which is what Salman Rushdie did. There's a very big difference between that. This is the conflation of two different issues came together. That people think that Muslims cannot tolerate criticism of their religion. That is not true. Muslims will tolerate discussion and criticism as long as you come to it respectfully. Not insulting. In the same way, we will respectfully criticize and debate and discuss non-Islamic ideologies and philosophies. Of course, that's da'wah. So we Muslims have to make it clear that it's the blasphemy and the insult that we don't tolerate, and that actually this is not part of the civilized discourse and the civilized society. It's not part of that at all. So this is really what the answer is here, is that we should be seeking legal means by which to stop these publications and these kind of films coming out under the interest of greater public good. And primarily also we want to defend our Prophet, and that's our main intention. But as far as the non-Muslims are concerned, we have to show that truly that this is not in public interest to have, this is against community cohesion. This is against communities working together in a constructive manner. And that is the kind of rhetoric and line we should take. And of course we should conduct ourselves with great intellectual vigor in dispelling these myths and showing that Muslims are reasoned and principled people. And this is very, very important. Anything from the sisters? Yes, sister. Yes, go ahead. Okay, I'll give you a minute. Okay, I'll just answer this question in the meantime. Okay, a non-Muslim asked a question to me that how come Adam and Eve's children were allowed to marry? Were they not brother and sister? This is true, but for that generation, the children of Adam alayhi salam were born in twins. So there would be one boy, one girl, and they would be born like this, in pairs. The forbiddance was, at that time, as the tafsir has shown us, that each child was not, that no child was allowed to marry its twin. They were allowed to marry another one of the children. Now at that time, obviously, the law of incest is suspended, and all the natural aversion a person would have in marrying their sister would not be there. It was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's law, and this is a natural command. So after that generation, then the law of incest came in. Okay, is that clear? So in those times, incest was redefined for that period of time, and Allah took away the natural aversion that one would have between them and their sister, so they were, and their blood sister. But as long as they weren't their twin, they were allowed to marry them. So this was not considered into that time, and that means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took away also the natural aversion, so they became like somebody who was a very mahram at that time. So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this makes, this obviously conforms with what our common sense would suggest as well, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not allow something which is disgusting. So it is He who defines what is good and what is bad. And at that time that was not bad, and it was considered good and wholesome, and a necessity obviously, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed that. In fact, that is the reason, or one of the reasons why Habil and Qabil actually, why Qabil killed Habil. Part of it, the jealousy was that he wanted to marry his own sister, as some Tafsir said. He wanted to marry his own twin, but Habil married Qabil's twin. And there was also a jealousy based on that as well. So there's a lot of interesting things that come out in Tafsir as well. But Allahu Alam, how authentic it is, but this is also said to be one of the reasons why Habil and Qabil, or Qabil had this enmity towards Habil. Allahu Alam. Any other questions from the yes, sister?
Assalamu alaikum, brother Salim. Thank you very much for taking your time to come to talk to us. I'm personally very interested in hearing about the work you're doing in the UK in relation to the dawah method that you are going to impart to us here in Canberra. If you could give us some overview of how you've conducted dawah in the UK and the results and the issues and challenges that you face there.
Okay, okay. Jazakallah khair for your question. Really, one thing that we have always, that IERA has been very particular about, is the fact that Islam is rational, because we're living in a time when people see themselves as being scientific, being very rational, and the reason for the rejection of Christianity and other religions in particular has been due to the irrationality of it, and also their perceived irrationality within Islam. So part of our dawah has been to show that the bases of Islam are rational. The fundamentals of Islam, the proof of Allah, the proof of the Messenger ﷺ, the proof of the Quran and the Word of God is rational, because the Quran and the Sunnah all point towards this. Once you've accepted it, then it stands to reason that once you know that the source is pure, it's like, when you go to a spring where you know that the water is always fresh and always pure, you're not going to keep testing the water each time, right? You know, Bismillah, that this is fine to drink from. So likewise, the revelation is like that. That first of all, we explain to people that, look, a lot of people ask questions about why do Muslims do this, why does Islam say that, and all that kind of thing. But one thing we spend time in saying that, look, even though there may be some wisdom behind these rules and laws, a person may not always be convinced of that. It becomes a bit arbitrary. So what do is that we say to them that, look, these laws, they come from these sources, and these sources, if you scrutinize them, are of impeccable authenticity. So we focus more on that. We also focus on the purpose of life. Because people who are normally atheist or secular or agnostic, they normally go through life without purpose, that they just want to enjoy themselves, they want to earn their money, blow it away the weekends, and live a very materialistic life without any spiritual fulfillment. So we want to show that Islam is very holistic, that it deals with your mind, body and soul and satisfies all three. And that's what you have been looking for and you never knew it. So we deal with people on very many levels, sister. We deal with people on a rational, on a human, on a spiritual level, showing how Islam has come to cover it all. One of the challenges that you mentioned, and one of the things that really does come to mind, that we do, alhamdulillah, due to the numbers, due to the way in which the rational argument is put, we do get shahada, we get a lot of people becoming Muslims. But one of the challenges we are definitely facing is how to keep those people as Muslims. Because a week later they go on the internet, maybe see some comments or some websites. I mean, believe me, I mean, during this week I've been doing a lot of research on consulting Sheikh Google. Seems to be the answer to everything. But you see that unbelievably, no matter what you search for, you type Islam and this, Islam and that, you will see a couple of anti-Islamic websites popping up near the top. Now, a lot of poor new Muslims, when they go home from the dawah table, may try and look for these things and find these doubts, and once they read them, they are written in a very convincing and a very intellectual and very rational way. And it's not surprising that a lot of people leave Islam very, very quickly. So we have this challenge, that how to keep brothers and sisters, our new brothers and sisters in Islam. So we've identified a couple of things, that, and inshallah, it's something that you can benefit from. Inshallah, it's important for the masajid and the centers to have a new Muslim program, to support and educate. And it's important for the community to treat their new brothers and sisters as they are, their new brothers and sisters. There is no way a new Muslim should be spending Eid alone. They should be radical. And they will be an inspiration to your families who may be practicing, semi-practicing, lackadaisical about their Islam. There's nothing more heartwarming than seeing a new Muslim who has given up what sometimes some less practicing members of our community are harking towards. And they always tell them that, look, brother, sister, it's no point, it's not worth it. I've been there, done that, it's not worth it. It just looks shiny, but when you go there, underneath it, it's a very dirty, nasty thing. So it's very important that the support needs to come from the community, and everybody needs to take responsibility for this. And before that, even when we take the Shahada, and one thing we're going to discuss in the course is ultimately La ilaha illallah is not an intellectual exercise. Convincing someone there's none worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is a messenger is not an intellectual exercise. It is a call to change a person's life, because La ilaha illallah means La ma'buda illallah, that there is none to be worshipped except Allah. Meaning that you have to start worshipping now. And the basic salah, even for a non-Muslim, is very simple. It's whatever they can do. They should be praying immediately, and that is when they start getting the connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they can even say that if they can say tasbih instead of reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, which they won't learn obviously in the first day or two, or whatever, and keep them praying and doing whatever they can in their prayer. Because the fiqh of prayer for a Muslim is very different. So this is something that we need to be doing a lot as well. It's telling you that now your whole point is to worship Allah, and you also should call people like you were called as well. So our new Muslims, mashallah, should become the foremost du'at as well. Because there are some Australians that, one brother was telling us just yesterday that he worked in a bank in Melbourne, and there'd be a guy walking in with a corkscrew hat and saying that, where are the flagging Aussies? I want to be served by an Aussie. They don't want to be served by some brown-faced guy. Seriously, there are people like that. So in the same way, we need to make sure that our du'at, which are of Australian origin, because they are able to understand the difficulties and challenges that come. Remember, prophets were sent to their own people for a reason. They know their culture, they know their language, but that does not mean that we who are not necessarily of indigenous Australian origin should not be doing that. It's not an excuse, because ultimately, if the Prophet ﷺ was sent as Rahmatan lil Alameen, as a messenger to all nations, then likewise we, being from all nations, have to carry on that message and be an ambassador for the Prophet ﷺ. Is this your question, sister? Yes. Okay, so we'll answer the question, sister, now. So the sister asked, how do we handle the issue of the normalization? Yes. Normalization of homosexuality and the changing of the Marriage Act to include relationships other than between man and woman in the education system. is now being used to make this normal and acceptable. First of all, we make it very clear that in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defines what is good and what is bad, and what is normal and what is abnormal. It's not a cultural norm that we are expressing here. This is from the one who made all of us. So it is very important that we establish that homosexuality is a sin in Islam without a shadow of a doubt. We should also be working with other people of other religions, particularly the Christians in this city, to create a coalition by which that the Muslims should be fighting this act. If it hasn't been passed already. We should be lobbying and we should be becoming very politically and socially active to make sure, because actually the majority of people do not find it acceptable. You are right. But there is this cultural pressure, political pressure to make it seem as backward for us not to accept it. And we have to change that by making sure that our public relations and our public profiling is, like, we shouldn't be just going on and saying, oh, it's unnatural. Because that looks very backward to a secular audience. We should be arguing that, look, when it comes to values, the value should be going back to the one who made us. It should be dawah in a way as well. But obviously you can't spend the whole time preaching, so what you're going to have to do is say, and different people have come to different conclusions about how they get their moral values and their whole system of looking at man, life, and the universe. So how can one group enforce it on everybody else? This is how we need to bring the debate out. That we can say it's actually very bigoted for you to enforce us. We should turn the tables around. We should say it's very bigoted of you and very backward of you to enforce your values on us. Whereas even in an Islamic state, my dear brothers and sisters, we do not enforce our laws on non-Muslim populations. Non-Muslims, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, had their charter by which they could keep their own institutions and have their own rules and laws. When the Yahud used to come to the Prophet ﷺ for arbitration, the Jews would come for arbitration because they didn't like their laws, they were too hard. They would come to the Prophet ﷺ because they knew it was an easier law. He would refer them back to their Torah. We say, why are you judging by your Torah? Because they wanted to make it easier, they wanted to go to the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ would then instruct them to go back to their rabbis for arbitration to be their judges. The Prophet ﷺ, this shows that the Islamic state at the time of the Prophet ﷺ was extremely advanced. Much further than the primitive ways of multiculturalism that secular societies in the West are trying to do. Where they say, look, we're going to have this broad-based liberal system of looking at of morals and values that you all have to accept because you're all meant to be Australian citizens. No, Islam doesn't say this. Islam says you have your own rules of law in your community, and when one of your members of your community violates the ruling of another, then that becomes now a state matter. So what I suggest is here, brothers and sisters, regarding this, is that we should be working with people of other religions. Now, if anybody who's got a reservation about this, you should realize that Allah says in the Quran, that cooperate you one another upon righteousness and piety, as defined by Islam, of course. So work with other people on those values, and do not cooperate with others upon sin and enmity. Imam al-Qurtubi, the great Mufassir, says that this ayah refers to Jami' al-Khalq. This applies to all of creation, meaning non-Muslims as well. You can cooperate with non-Muslims on something that is good and wholesome. This is the proof for it. Even though some non-Muslims to fight in the army of the Prophet ﷺ, no problem. So in this case, we are allowed. Absolutely, it's actually obligatory on us to unite with other religious groups, especially if we would now make up a coalition of the majority, and we should be able to overturn and lobby government and members of parliament and etc. to try and put pressure on them. Because that's the way things work in Western democracies. People think about voting and say, no, it doesn't work like that. It's all about lobbying. It is all about lobbying. knowing who to get, and the majority of people that can bring the bigger interest for that particular member of parliament, that they will get their way. And that's why we Muslims have got to become very politically savvy now. But before we do that, we have to know our religion. And once we know that, the fundamentals of our religion, then we know the principles by which we know we can understand our political participation. And that's the important thing here. That we Muslims need to know how to do that and start implementing that. Alhamdulillah, we've been reasonably successful in the UK, and we're getting more stronger and stronger. And we're able now to lobby and block things that we weren't able to do before. And that's because, alhamdulillah, due to various circumstances, various issues that have united the Muslim community together. So we as Muslims need to do that. We need to start putting away aside petty differences, unite for the greater good, and become more knowledgeable about the way political processes run in this country, and how to get things done in this country. This is from doing that. In the United States and the UK, the Jewish community have become very good at that. They've had a considerably longer history in the UK anyway. They've been there for 1,000 years, so they've got 1,000 head start on the Muslim community, which is obviously quite way ahead. But we Muslims have got to play catch up fast, because it is important that we realise that if we are here as part of Australian society, or Western society at large, then we need to start building those institutions and building those relations such that we can protect our community and their interests. And more importantly than that, protect the environment that dawah can flourish. Because calling to La ilaha illallah is the main interaction that we need to have with non-Muslims in this country. And that is borne out by the actions of all the Rusul alayhi salatu wassalam. Yes, brother, is there any more questions? Or? Yes, brother.
Don't you think you ought to be really a bit more careful about criticising multiculturalism and also criticising other people of the book as being irrational? I mean, Islam can stand on its own. It does not have to denigrate the other people of the book. And also multiculturalism, if you look here, my goodness, this is the best show of multiculturalism you can find. We all live in peace in this country. Now, can I say one thing? I don't want to go into your argument about the recent changes in the laws, but it would also seem to me that obviously none of those people who would be interested in those laws are Muslim. So why be so concerned? Because I've been involved in social work for many years. It seems to me, therefore, that amongst Islam, Allah obviously has not created people who have issues about gender. I think these are really big issues, and I think in some ways you really simplify issues about evolution, you simplify people's rejection of Christianity as being irrational. I think these are dangerous things. Issues, for instance, if I can say about Adam and Eve, there is a huge amount of exegetical literature that explains that Adam is the Hebrew word meaning mankind, and that we should not necessarily take this literally. And there are also Muslim scholars who would hold the same view. Now, so the thing is, how do you know, for instance, I mean, you accuse Muslims of giving answers, right, to difficult questions that they may not know for sure. How do you know that after Adam and Eve, which are mythical figures, that there were generations of twins? I've never heard that before in my life, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, brother, for airing your views in a very candid manner. That's exactly what I would hope from Australians, and actually from anybody. And I really thank you for doing that, because that's the only way, by having these kind of discourses in the open, are we able to achieve anything. First of all, my dear brother, I've been given 40 minutes, or I gave myself 40 minutes to give a talk. So for me to have gone into all those things, with all the differences of opinion, I could have spent maybe an entire week boring you to tears on each of those subjects. So my simplification was not really due to a simple appreciation of the subject. it was really down to timing, and for me to give you an executive summary, if you like, on all these issues. You brought up some very important questions, which I wanted to really write them down before I forget, because getting a bit older now, I'm the age of 40, then I think memory is not one of my attributes here. So please remind me if I've forgotten to cover any of the points that you raised. So first of all, we have to look at the whole liberal definition of multiculturalism. The definition of multiculturalism under a secular framework is very different to what you described as the phenomenon that we're seeing right here. The definition of multiculturalism is causing, now this debate is being very advanced in the UK, because it's causing a lot of problems. Because what people are seeing it as is that there's a very simple way that you think, okay, we all eat curry, we all eat Arab food, we all eat beans on toast, and therefore everything's hunky-dory. And you and I, and you as well, know as well as I do, it's not as simple as that.
Can I just remind you, I'm a critical sociologist, and I'm aware of these debates, and again, excellent. I think there are much more critical views of multiculturalism.
Okay, excellent, right. But the point that I'm putting across here is that the standard way in which secular democracies are talking about multiculturalism is obviously in the context of subjective morality. Okay? We as Muslims don't have that. We Muslims have a very clear-cut, absolute and objective morality which is defined to us by an all-wise and all-knowing creator. So for us, there are some things which, despite however many Muslims, scholars or otherwise, agree with something, if it goes against a clear-cut textual scripture, which is qat'i thubut and qat'i dalala, which is of absolute authenticity and absolute clear-cut meaning, unambiguous meaning, then we are not going to budge from that. That's what being Muslim means. The thing about multiculturalism is that it's a way of handling different ideas in a secular framework. But what it is, and the UK experience has shown this, it's like banging a mold from underneath a carpet. You try and smack it here, it's going to appear somewhere else. You try and smack it there, it appears somewhere else. You see those kids' games which are like that. Because what's happening now is that they don't have to, that we as human beings can never come up with a better system than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came up with. And that was the best system, which was, you know what? You people, even though you don't believe in Allah in the way that Allah has prescribed for you, but you can have your own judiciary. You can have your own judiciary, you can have your own rules and laws. And the Prophet ﷺ and the Islamic State for 1400 years showed how people lived in absolute harmony. In fact, the person, do you know who opens the Church of the Holy Sepulchre? The most holy site in Christendom, where Jesus is supposed to have been crucified, according to the Christians. You know who opens it? A Muslim, who was instituted there by Salahuddin Ayyubi, by Saladin. He instituted that family because of the fighting that takes place there due to various Christian factions. A Muslim has to open that church in the morning and lock it at night. To this day, this tradition goes on ahead. Muslims show the world how to tolerate people who do not believe in your same ideology. Muslims showed what real tolerance is. So the whole point is that multiculturalism is a secular term, which is about bringing people together under common values. I've got a document sitting in my room right now of the government, of the UK government, and believe me, the Australian government will soon follow. Because the argument is that we need to unify everything. Say everyone has the same law. Everyone has to believe that democracy, democratic values. This, my dear brother, is nothing more than dictatorship by the back door. Because what they're saying to you is, you can have freedom of speech and freedom of sport as long as our understanding of freedom of speech and as long as our understanding of freedom of thought. And we can maybe have a discussion on that later. As for the rules regarding homosexuality and such like, we as Muslims have every right to take part in this society and say that we do not believe that these values are in the best interest to be taught to everybody. We're not saying that we should go around gay bashing and harming homosexuals. Rather, I believe we should do dawah to them. Why not? We've done it in the UK. A number of homosexual people have repented and come to Islam and live totally normal heterosexual lives now. They admit that this was just an experiment of theirs, or they admit that this was just some type of perversion of theirs. That's what they say. These are not my words. These are their words. So what we say is that while there are bigger crimes in Islam, like missing a prayer on time, deliberately, is worse than any act of homosexuality. We should get into context here. Because that's an act of kufr, according to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. It may not take you out of Islam, but it's an act that can wipe out your entire deeds for the day. That there are people doing worse things, and Islam is not there to look into people's bedrooms. But it's there to give a general way for us, and we have every right to say that our children should be taught in a certain way that fulfills their interest. There's nothing wrong in that. In fact, democracy, on the face of it, seems to allow that. Regarding the issue of evolution and the whole issue of Adam and Eve, there's been a debate and discussion about this only in recent years. If we look at all Islamic scholarship, there has been an absolute, overwhelming consensus, without a shadow of a doubt, that Adam and Eve were real people. 150, it's only in the last 100 years when the evolution discourse became popular in the West that some Islamic scholars, whose credentials I have every right to doubt, because I've seen those credentials and I know a number of them, I know where they got this idea from. Why did this argument only happen to occur within Muslim communities after it happened within Western society? Because the discussion was more about an embarrassment from certain biblical sides of how to explain the creation of Adam and Eve, and also the way the world was made as well. Muslims have never had that problem. We don't believe the earth was 6,000 years old. And neither did some of the classical Christian scholars. And you're right that when I was going to the other points, when I was talking about the other religions, etc., that you will see that when it comes to some of the bases that I talked about that Islam has, when it comes to scriptural scrutiny, when it comes to the philosophical justification of the existence of God or otherwise, that you will see that from Christian scholars themselves, and people who have left Christianity because of this, they will say that when it came to biblical scripture, it is extremely arbitrary. To the point where you cannot say that it's the word of God anymore. It's surgical. It's a surgical affair. These are from Christian scholars that I'm quoting, from biblical scholars, not from Muslim scholars. That's just pointless anyway. But the whole point regarding evolution and likewise is that, first of all, we have to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of doing anything. He can make people live for 1,000 years, he can make them live for 1 second. That is not, if we now restrict Allah by saying that, oh, well, how can someone live for more than 200 years, then it's a very deficient God that we believe in. So Allah can do anything. He says that very clearly in the Quran. But if you look at the words and the grammatics, this is the reason why we brothers and sisters must learn Arabic. Because when we learn Arabic, we understand there are certain words which cannot be allegorical. There are certain words which are not open to interpretation. For example, can that be open to interpretation? Let's say that your Lord is one. Likewise, when Allah addresses Adam and Eve, He addresses them directly with speech and as human beings. And the Prophet ﷺ himself, who is the truthful person, said that they were human beings. In fact, his lineage is preserved all the way back to Adam alayhi salam. So this idea that they are allegorical has come from, unfortunately, very colonized minded Muslim scholars, and I can give you their names, and I've met some of them, and I've discussed this with them, and I have, in my experience, they are not able to even discuss this rationally. This is a very emotive topic for them. You can't sit down and discuss it. They become very upset. They become very, you're sitting there calmly. They're becoming very upset, and to me, it's more. It seems like it's an emotional problem for them. They feel maybe an inferiority complex with their own Islam, and therefore they want to maybe, in case if you can't beat them, join them. But what they don't realize is that that there are certain things in evolution theory which are still open to question. That's why it's still a theory. And why is it that even non-Muslims who are questioning these theories, why are some Muslims or people who call themselves Muslims, are the first to accept it lock, stock and barrel without scrutinizing it. Just because lots of people have said it. There is a sizable scientific community which is muzzled and stopped from talking about non-evolution theories. In fact, it's being now railroaded through Western education systems in a way, and it is, some parts of it are extremely irrational. And there's leaps of faith, more leaps of faith made in evolution than there is in Islam. Islam does not rely on leaps of faith. It relies on intellectual scrutiny of texts. Once those texts are clear and unequivocal, we accept it. That's how the Muslim scholarship has always worked. And that's how Muslims made their scientists. But the leaps of faith involved in evolution are extremely sad to see, really. And when you see people like even Dawkins being quizzed by even members of other religious communities, he has to, this was all ultimately a reaction. It's a reaction to Christianity. It's a reaction to the crisis that the historical church did have. I don't think this maybe now the church is reconciled with science. I was talking historically. Historically, the Catholic Church did have a very hard time with science. I'm not sure about now, I don't think so now, but in the past it had a very, very hard time. And that's why it went around creating inquisitions and pogroms where scientists were tortured, etc., where we Muslims haven't had that history. That's really the point all that I wanted to make. So inshallah, I mean, as I said, these are very big topics and we can try to discuss them in more detail personally afterwards, but really the point here is our scholarship should not be based on external factors. It should be based around the text, what the text is saying, and we accept it. And it's a fact that nothing in Islam